Hello and greetings from the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center in New Haven, Connecticut. I'm Peter Sonsky. I thank you for your interest in today's online session. Before I introduce our guest and topic, allow me to share a few details that I think will be of benefit to all of our live viewers. There is a small utility in the margin of the live view screen for participants. Anybody that wants to submit a written question, just click on that question mark and you can submit a question at any time during the session. I expect the session should last somewhere on the order of 45 minutes. There's also a utility for viewers to download a handout. I've prepared a handout. It has our guest's website, her Facebook page, more information about the show here at the McGivney Center, as well as other background information about the McGivney Center itself. You can find that in the download utility, again, on the margin of your live screen. Today is June 12th, 2023. Today's presentation is being recorded for the benefit of those unable to join us live, and it will be available for on-demand viewing via the McGivney Center's YouTube channel. I'll send you all a reminder link with that opportunity when the file has been posted to YouTube. So my guest today is Ms. Erin Shaw. She's an artist whose work is featured in the McGivney Center's featured exhibit, Altars of Reconciliation. The show is on view through August 13th of 2023. Erin is a Christian and she is of Native American ancestry. The exhibit, which she curated in collaboration with two other artists whose work is on display, centers on their embrace of Christianity as Indigenous American peoples. Some may see a potential dichotomy in the acceptance among Native Americans of the faith introduced to the United States by European settlers and colonists. It is that theme precisely that the show seeks to address. Erin, welcome. Thank you for your willingness to discuss Altars of Reconciliation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Peter.
Please tell us a little bit about your background, how it was that you became interested in a career in art.
Yeah, so I actually might have a little bit of a different background in that I really didn't know that I was going to be an artist. I was always, I think, as a child, really tapped into my creativity, but it wasn't until really I went to college and took a couple art classes that I decided to major in art. But I just really never grew up thinking I was going to be an artist. And so it's kind of become, it's just been an unfolding surprise to me all along the way, which I love. But I did major in art. I went to Baylor University and I got a degree in a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art. And then I have an MFA from the University of Oklahoma in painting. And once I sort of made up my mind that I was going to be an artist, I haven't really let any grass grow under my feet. But yeah, I always kind of, it's a little bit perplexing as to how I arrived here. But I do believe that being an artist is one of the great gifts of my life. And I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for the fact that I get to do this type of work and engage ideas and people in ways. Art has ways of creating conversation that I think are really, really difficult to have otherwise. So it's been a really wonderful journey so far.
Erin, the show's been very popular and it's very distinct, as I mentioned in the outset. So I want to just point out something that you make mention of in your introductory statement for Altars of Reconciliation. You talk about having a foot in two worlds, but then you go on to say that your faith, your Christian faith, has been enriched and deepened and is more whole as a result of being Native American. So talk a little bit about that tension that I mentioned earlier about being of Native American ancestry and fully embracing Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because I do feel most of my life I've really been very aware of that tension because these have been two really foundational elements of my life from the very beginning, obviously. and I always had this sense that people felt like those things were in opposition. And even like in a lot of research, you will hear scholars talking about saying that they feel sorry for Native Americans that would follow Jesus because they must be having some identity crisis, and that it's actually impossible to that these things are so diametrically oppositional that you cannot both be indigenous and follow Jesus. And so I think I always just really had that deep sense that these things is a difficult place to inhabit. Um, and I would say specifically the work in altars, it has because like I really do enjoy approaching subjects with a lot of research, and I think I'm really led by questions, and so I can be really really curious, and I like to read, and so taking in all of this information that was in preparation for making this work, there were some things. So, like I said, I was always like inherently aware of this tension, but there were things that I read that I had never heard before in my research. One of the things that I found really fascinating was um, the early Native Americans, they actually, when they encountered the story of Jesus, they actually embraced Jesus and felt a kindredness, and like they recognized him. But they made this distinction between the story of Jesus and the culture of the people that brought Jesus to them, and they had a pretty deep hatred for the culture.
Mhm.
And something about the research and seeing that in places made me realize, wow, that's like really similar to where we are today. Um, the way that Western culture has sort of wrapped itself around Jesus in ways that kind of, not kind of, are really um, in opposition to who Jesus was and the message that he taught and brought. And so I think in the course of the work, making this work, what I realized was, I know that this is an obvious statement, but I think it's different when something about being an artist and embodying a practice kind of weaves what you're learning into you in a deep, deep level. So it like moves from an intellectual understanding to like something that's really woven into you, is the fact that Jesus did not live in a Western context, and he wasn't a Western man. And I started to become really interested in this idea of like, if I'm approaching Jesus, or if anybody's approaching Jesus with a Western mindset or a lens, what is it they're missing? And in that way, in those ways, I started to realize that my indigenous sort of like orientation to the world helped me um, approach aspects of Jesus that maybe I wasn't aware of, or that maybe had not been like given to me in a lot of the contexts that I had been in. And I have to say, like, I think it was pretty life changing for me, which is like such the gift of being an artist. I always say, like, you bring what you bring to the work, which is your questions, your talent, your skill, the process, and the work always gives you something back. And I feel like this work specifically gave me back just some really fundamental insight, and that I do believe has really deepened my relationship with God in really surprising ways.
I hear two really keen insights there. Um, the experience you have from your indigenous upbringing and the kind of the formation that you may have received from your parents, your grandparents, and others in those formative years, but also the experience that you have as an artist because you're a creator.
Yep.
You bring things to be in a way that most do not.
Hmm.
So you see things in a very distinct way. Can you share a little bit about your tribal ancestry?
Sure. I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. I am also of Choctaw descent, And my Chickasaw lineage comes through my mother's side of the family, and my Choctaw ancestry comes from also through my mother's side of the family. But my grandfather was Choctaw, and my grandmother was Chickasaw. And I was I was raised in southeastern Oklahoma, which is the land that both the Chickasaw and the Choctaw would have originally been removed to. And the land that I grew up on was really, really significant to me because I think place is something that is important in Indigenous communities. But that land was, we were raised in this Native American schoolhouse that had been built by Indians who had been originally removed to the land, and there was a limestone quarry, and the land always had so much sort of mystery and intrigue and history to it. And that I think it's interesting because one of the things I say is it's just really difficult to get away from your beginnings. And that's where I started. I started on that land and having free roam of it, and just had always had this sense of being connected to my ancestors through that place. And so, I mean, I could talk a long, long time about my Native American family, but that's a little bit.
So now you're not a first generation Christian either, right? You inherited your Christian faith through your family?
That's correct. Yes. Many generations of followers of Jesus before me, and I think it's one of the things also that's so interesting about all that research is that there is a real prominent influence of Christianity in tribal communities for obvious reasons, but many tribal people have embraced the story of Jesus, and so it's not uncommon that that would be a fact of of a person's life.
Erin, what I'd like to do, if I may, is to advance the slides here a little bit. We'll take a look at some of the unique pieces that you have on display here, and maybe you could give a little bit of background for each.
Absolutely,
Can you see this slide?
I can. Yes. Yeah. So the Sea of Stories. Well, I think that it's this piece actually sort of encapsulates a lot of the things that I'm really interested in general in my practice. So I am really, really fascinated with stories. I always have been. I feel like in a world where things are rapidly changing, stories are one of those stabilizing factors. We're always using stories. We're always living in the midst of a bunch of stories. We always will, no matter how much the world changes. We will always need stories. They serve us, and in many ways, we serve them as well. So I talk a lot about stories as an artist. And I also talk a lot about the need for stories to bend and flow and sort of live in liquid form. And so you'll see a lot of water imagery in all of my work. Um, so this piece is like it's a sea in all of these little circular forms and just little fragments of stories. I talk a lot about how I think that stories are as much my medium as paint and canvas, and that um, what we do oftentimes as human beings is we like live in this sea of stories, each of us does, and we are changing and we are growing, and we are taking our stories into our new context, but we're also recontextualizing them because we are different. We're the same, but we're also different. And so it's just, I love the imagery of just these little pieces of stories that are just kind of peeking out of these crests of the waves. So
I
that's a
agree.
little, yeah.
Erin, when I first saw this hung in the gallery, I was struck by, first of all, how vivid the colors are. But more than that,
Mhm.
um, you've got it framed on wood, something that's very sturdy, very stable. But
Yeah.
there's so much life, there's so much motion in this art. It seems too like it's a little bit of a dichotomy, because while it's in this this um, this frame or this presentation that has a real sturdiness about it. It seems like it wants to just jump right off.
Yeah, I love that you have made that distinction. I mean, I am very, very interested in, over the trajectory of my life as an artist, I've been super interested in, um, the way that duality has influenced us as maybe people that live in North America specifically. And for a long time, my work was really all about this idea of opposites. And as I've grown and progressed, I began to realize that actually I think that duality is, it's a it's false. That really all of reality is incredibly interrelated, and we just don't always see that as a fact, because it's like the legacy of duality is pretty heavy and burdensome. But I love, like, even we were just traveling in Europe. I love altarpieces. I think they're so interesting, and I think that the distinction that you're making between like the liveliness within these really solid structures feels really like a very, very acute observation on your part, because I do think about that a lot. I think about the way that the structure can sometimes can contain the life and the power and the beauty of our faith, and how ways that I could maybe practice my faith in a way that challenges some of those structures, and yet it's still a reality. So yeah, there's probably lots of layers to it.
It's a powerful piece, that's for sure.
Thank you.
How about this one?
Well, I love birds, and my work, as a whole, I use birds a lot, and I love thinking about birds being messengers, and that creation is always speaking. Creation knows what to do, and that these are things that God gave us to speak to. I mean, this is straight out of Scripture, that all of creation is to speak to us of His unseen, unknown, mysterious qualities. And it feels like to me, creation is this just like untapped resource, and like knowledge and information about living and life. And I'm would say that I'm really, really connected to the created world. And so birds play a huge part in my work. And then in the back, the gold, I I this is like just like a silhouette of tree imagery that I then used. I used gold for gold leaf. I mean, like, I love gold leaf, and I think it's really interesting historically. And then I just kind of like want to use it in some unusual maybe ways. Um, but birds are incredible. People are always like, "Why do you like birds so much?" I'm like, "Why do you not like birds? They're amazing." And it's like once you start to like dive into birds and species and like their habits, the way they build nests, it's really, really phenomenal, how perplexingly complex their lives are, and how much that can speak to us.
Well, I really like the fact, you used the rondelles on the previous slide, and this too. It really, and it's a detail too, obviously. So you're looking close up at the bird's breast and head, and it's such a stark view against the silhouetted tree in the background. Um, a beautiful piece. It
Thanks.
really is powerful in the show. All right, so this is really distinct.
Yes, this is probably the most recent. Well, it's not probably. It is the most recent um, painting that I have completed. It's interesting because when I was painting this, I realized that this is the first painting that I had painted in 15 years that did not have a destination or a deadline or a place to go. I
Hmm.
was um, I was just in my studio, and I had been essentially I had been thinking about love. I've been thinking a lot about love in the last probably 5 years of my life. I feel like God has been teaching me a lot in regards to love, and one of the things that I had kind of just had this phrase like that was just going through my head a lot, that like at my deepest core, what I am is love. And there's like an ocean of love that is inside of me. And really all my job is to do every day is just to release that ocean of love inside of me, and to open myself so that I can continue to receive love and give love and receive love and give love. That's just a flow. So it's a bird. Um, it's supposed to be a door in its chest, and but I don't know how well that reads, and just the ocean of love inside. And the bird has red feet, which I think is, maybe some people would notice it, maybe some people wouldn't. There's a book uh, called the Medieval Book of Birds. It's an aviarium. It's a type of bestiary. So bestiaries were, books that were created in the Middle Ages for when people were really predominantly illiterate, and the bestiaries would with images and animals, they would portray the spiritual life. Well, there's some books that exist that are that just pertain to birds, and they're super old and really interesting. But there's a portion in the aviarium, this one, that talks about the mourning dove representing the church, and that the feet of the mourning dove are red because as they travel the breadth of the earth, their feet are wounded by the harshness of the land. And I just always loved that imagery. It felt really powerful to me. So,
I love the rays. They're very strong. Um,
mhm.
Erin, you used mixed media and you use three-dimensional presentations. Is there something specific about the pedestal?
Well, sure. Um, I mean, oftentimes I don't know that I'm when you're in the creative process, it feels oftentimes you're being led. You don't always necessarily understand what you're doing. I feel that way. I mean, I guess there's a lot of ways to approach your creative process as an artist. I oftentimes am like, what am I doing? I have no idea. And it could be like a year, 18 months, 2 years later that I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. But I had this piano that was a part of my family, and it was beautiful. You'll notice this wood that's in all of these pieces. And it was a player piano, and it had this tiger wood. It's just beautiful, beautiful. But it was, we were moving, and it's expensive to fix a piano. Player piano is very expensive to fix. And at some point, I was just like, I'm going to take this piano apart, and I'm going to use the wood for art. I'm just going to give it another life. And so I dismantled this piano, which was like such a fascinating process. If you've ever really looked at the inside of an old piano, it's like a piece of art in itself. And so I took the piano apart, and then I just had all this raw material, and then I just sort of like started putting it back together in different ways. And so, but I love this piece. You can't really tell from the image, but it's got like a shelf that will fold down and fold up. And um, it sort of had this altered feeling to it, to me. Like you could engage with it if you wanted to.
I agree. I like how you describe, you know, as you're working through this process, sometimes you're struck by doing something and not really knowing exactly why, and it's got to be at times just a crazy feeling to but you seem like you have a comfort or a confidence with it, and
Yeah, it's weird.
ultimately it becomes manifest.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're absolutely right. There's a really strong comfort with it, and I think that in in my personality, I am really really intuitive, and I've always wanted my art practice as closely as it can to mirror who I am and to be really integrated with who I am, so that like what I'm making is out of the overflow of who I am. And in the beginning, it was hard for me to kind of understand how I could be like exerting control over the process and still be intuitive. And then at some point, I just realized there were things that I could do in the process that would sort of make room for that, and that there are a lot of different ways to be an artist. So it's not there's it's just this is just tends to be a part of my process, that I don't really want to stand over the work and tell it what it needs to be. I think I could do that, but I feel like when I'm either standing equal with it or even underneath it, that's where things happen that are really interesting that I might not be able to get at on my own. And I think that's the part of like making room for the Holy Spirit, and how that can lead the work that you're making. And there are so many surprising things that happen. And so then you get a little bit of experience with it. And then it's like, it's exciting actually when I'm starting on something, because I'm like, wow, I have no idea what's going to show up, but I can't wait to see it, you know? And I think that's really lovely. Also, just the way that as an artist, that that has formed me in my own spirituality as well. And when you have that experience in your day-to-day work and in your practice, then also you can make room for that in any number of areas of your life. So
It's
those
obvious.
are the places where it's like I'm so grateful to be an artist, you know?
It's obvious that you have a lot of trust in whatever influence you're feeling, and you've done it enough to know that in the end there's something truly meaningful that emerges. So that's got to be a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, it is.
Here we go, more rondelles, more very, very vividly colorful rondelles,
What
and
is the
more
word you're
structure.
using?
Rondelle, like a circle, you know, a circular depiction of something. But
Okay,
you've
I don't think I've ever heard that word before.
Rondell, yeah, a lot of times in liturgical art, if you've been into, I mean, you shared recently that you visited Europe. Sometimes they'll have circular depictions in churches, either of you know, a famous figure in the faith or of biblical scenes or what have you, and they're depicted in circles. So sometimes called
Yeah,
rondelles.
I love circles. For a long time, I like to paint really large, and I would make these long, sort of narrow, rectangular pieces where I'm like investigating a story. And I think two things. I got a little bit smarter, not a lot smarter, but a little bit smarter, because if you like to paint large, it's just like it's problematic, you know. But I started working in round panels that were just I could still have like a 17-foot piece, but like, you know, you could put the round circles together, and it's as far as like traveling it or transporting it, much more manageable. And then I think the other thing is that I realized that life is not linear. I mean, we think that it is, but and especially in Indigenous thought, you know, there is a sense that like when you're going through something, you you always have the opportunity to come back around, and cycles of life and death and seasons, and the circle has become really a kind of a predominant element. I almost exclusively work on circles now. So this painting, Everything Belongs, for I really have probably an entire body of work. It's never necessarily shown together, but around this idea, everything belongs. So in the left panel, when you're looking at it, there are historic images that would relate to indigenous either artifacts or stories, or um, things that sort of come from that my Native American heritage. And then on the right there is I don't know what I said. The left, that's what I meant. On the right, there are historic images that come from really well known. Like there's an image of the eagle from the Book of Kells in there. Saint uh, George, Saint George, is he the dragon slayer?
He is.
Yeah, that's who that is. Um, Images that maybe would refer more or point more to my Christian faith, as at least as how maybe other people would interpret that. And still going back to that idea of like feeling like I had a foot in two worlds and not really knowing how do I embrace all of this. And at some point, I kind of realized that I couldn't control any of that. And this is like the fact pattern of my life, and that there is actually a place for all of it. There's a place for, I mean, everything does belong in my life, and it's not an accident. And one of the things that I think as I continue to grow into all of this is that for a long time I was trying to reconcile the opposites and make sense out of it. And what I'm learning, I think probably current day, is actually like the tension is not something to explain away. The tension is something to embody, and that the tension has become, for me, it's my place. I know it's actually it's the place I'm supposed to live. It's the place I'm supposed to inhabit. Because what I've found is that like if you can make room for that tension, you can hold things that feel like they're opposing in the same place. Then there's like really unexpected, beautiful things to discover in those places. And so now it's almost like a current day spiritual practice where I look for places where my mind wants to say, oh, these things can't live alongside each other. And then it's like, oh, there's something really interesting there. If I just push into that and go spend some time in that tension, I'm going to receive something really beautiful.
That's so fascinating because I think it's human nature to shun or avoid tension, to run from it. And
Mhm.
you actually seem to seek it.
I know, it's crazy.
Well, it produces beautiful art, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Here we go. More, you use such bright colors.
Yeah, I do. I
There's
do love color.
there's so
I
much
mean, if you're
joy
gonna
in
be
the
a painter,
colors.
you might as well use color if you're gonna be a painter.
Well,
This,
like I said, it conveys a lot of joy.
yeah. Well, that's good. I've got a lot of joy, so that feels appropriate. There was a book that I read in my research, and I believe the title of it was Into the Woods. Charles Eastman, and it was sort of like a biography, I believe. And there was a quote in there that was pretty powerful. I mean, there are a lot of quotes like this. I have like, documents and documents full of all kinds of things that in from my research, but talked about how the early missionaries or the early explorers or both seemed to be very anxious to give away their faith, and they kept very little of it for themselves. And man, I just always thought that was so powerful. And I think that this underneath the image here is of a church, like a little church building structure that is an image that I use in my paintings, and it's wrapped up in string. And I think I was thinking about those thoughts about the ways that like the truth gets obscured by all kinds of things, and how much help we need in sort of like cleaning the lens of our perception to actually encounter the truth of who Jesus is, past all of our cultural baggage. So it's
That's
sort of like, it's kind of like hidden, underneath
yeah.
all of
And what you're doing is making evident things that we overlook. These things exist, these barriers, these obstacles, but we don't see them. They're present. They're a factor for us. but you're making them obvious here. So it's a good reflection. Again, circles, so no beginnings and no ends. Erin, I'm feeling something like a globe. Is it possibly? Is that a
Sure.
fair interpretation for
I
a
mean, hey, I love hearing other people talk about what they see when it comes to my work. Probably because of what I already said. Like a lot of times, I don't know what I'm doing, and sometimes, somebody will say something, and I'll be like, "Wow, that really feels right. That really resonates." Um, but yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm not. I don't know that I'm ever necessarily like thinking about painting a globe, but sure.
Hey, it speaks to me. It speaks
Good,
to me.
good. I love it.
Oh boy, more
Oh,
strength.
I love this piece. It's so different than anything I've ever done before, and it's got a lot of layers of history and meaning. So when um, when Native American communities were removed from their homelands, and they were removed and they were relocated, and so for like the Chickasaw and the Choctaw, we were relocated to Oklahoma, and there was a thing called the Dawes Commission, and it was essentially it was sort of like a census. So um, when indigenous communities were removed, they they were allotted land in the places that they were relocated to, and so there was a role. We refer to it as, I mean, some it is called the Dawes Commission, but some people call it Dawes, some people just call it the roll. And Native Americans were asked to sign the roll in order to be able to receive the land. Um, and it was sort of just a way that the government kept track of what happened and who they were and where they were sent. And so, in order for me to have Chickasaw citizenship, I had to be able to trace my lineage to an original enrollee. So it's a little bit of history. So the woman in the middle, her name is Carrie Pound, and she is the original enrollee for my family. And so I had to, trace through genealogy and birth certificates, death certificates, myself to her. Um, the woman on the right, her name's Granny Belva, and that's my great grandmother. And then the woman on the left, Granny Carol, that's my grandmother, all maternal side of the family. And so Chickasaw culture is a matrilineal society. So there is incredible respect and um, admiration for the women in it just historically, and you can still feel that today. It's really really interesting, especially being, I think in some ways, of course this isn't true for every Christian community, but in some ways women can really be undervalued in the world today. And so it's always been this really interesting thing to me. I have like, it's just like all of these really strong women that have surrounded me from the beginning, and that just I never stood a chance, at being anything other than a strong woman. And so these are like some of the strong women in my family. But then um, there's a picture underneath all of that of that rock house that I grew up in. There's a picture actually of the roll card, my family's roll card. Underneath there, there is a bit of scripture underneath there where it says, "But who do you say that I am?" And then the title "Protect Us from Ruin," that's also in there. So one of my ancestors, James Logan Colbert, he was Chickasaw. One of his sons was Chickasaw chief at the time of removal, and there were letters that I found that were written from him to the president, and talking about the state of the Chickasaw people and what was actually happening. And one of those letters he signed, "Protect Us from Ruin." And I just I've always always been really interested in like those places that connect me in my current context to this, like objects, to this historical, you know, sort of like it's almost like a story that you've heard but you don't really know is true, but then there become these like material objects that connect you, that make you feel like you actually were a part of this story or are a part of this story. But there are a lot of those letters that I found that are really interesting. And so that's, I mean, I love this piece. I just think there's a lot of layers to it, and the string is really, the thread is really evident in all my work also, which is a whole nother hour conversation in itself.
I mean, in some ways, when I look at it, I see you mentioned strong women. I see three strong women, but I see something that either the thread, the string, either symbolizes that strength and that kind of holding together. You talked about the importance of the role of women in the ancestry of the Chickasaw tribal nation, and so maybe that's what I'm seeing. But it obviously conveys um, something, a uniting quality about it. Again, I'm trying to be an amateur art critic here, I
Hey,
guess.
I actually think you're doing a really great job.
More string,
Yeah.
more string.
Yeah,
Now,
lots of thread.
this is a real departure now.
Hmm.
No paint here, no imagery. You've got these. I don't mean to be flip, but I heard from somebody who came out of the exhibit and said they look like the inside of baseballs,
The inside of what?
inside of a baseball.
Oh yeah, interesting.
Sometimes they're woven so
Yeah.
tightly with thread that
Yeah. Yeah, I have a baseball player, so I know exactly what the inside of a baseball looks like, and that is actually pretty accurate. This is probably a little more colorful, but um, yeah, the thread is has become such an interesting part of my work. It's like really fascinating. If I like take a step back and look at like the evolution of thread in my work from the beginning, it's like, wow, it's really interesting. So I when I start on canvas, I put just a lot of color down first, and it's just real non-objective abstract. It's just color really. And when the paint's wet, I would just drop string into it, and I kind of felt like I was making these cartographical representations of our life. The line that the string would make in the wet paint was really beautiful and lyrical. And then when it would dry, I would pull the string up and I would just like I would keep it. So I had just like all of this colorful string in my studio, and it just would sit there. I mean, probably for years. And one day I was in my studio and I was processing personally some really deep loss and grief. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I started like writing these little one word prayers on these little scraps of white paper. You can see them if you look really closely. You can see like the little orange ball at the bottom. You can see a little piece of white paper in the inside. And I was thinking anyway, so I was having these one word prayers, and then I was just like almost like meditatively, I was like wrapping them up really tightly with this string. I felt like at that place in my life, I felt like God was telling me to just hold the pain in my hands and to not try to understand it, not try to like rationalize it, not try to like make some life lesson out of it, but just hold it and like let it teach me what it needed to teach me. And so I made hundreds of these, having no idea what I was doing. And then, in the way that God often does, tells you to do the exact opposite of what you've been doing. And I felt like I was just supposed to let it go. And the pain and what I like in the studio started to realize that this is that so much of our life is lived in this internal space. Our hopes, our longings, our pain, our loss, all of that. Most times people have no idea unless you really deliberately choose to invite them into it. And that all of those little prayers seemed so intimate and hidden, but that God had the capacity to like take those things and make them manifest in really beautiful ways. So there's this whole body of work that I made after I was just sitting in my studio making these things. And then it was like, God was like, now let go of the pain and watch what I'm going to do with it. And there's this whole body of work called Season Threads, and where this bird has like all these little painted little balls of string, and it's like letting them go, and these beautiful things emerge out of them. So these little things kind of, that's a long way of saying they started to represent to me the embodiment of prayer. Like when I look at one of these, I'm like, this is my visualization of prayer. And then also just the amazing way that God has the capacity to take those things and just make something out of it. How amazing.
It is. It's a fascinating story, and it gives a new dimension to prayer and that dialogue with God.
Yeah, I think prayer can be such an abstract. Yeah, so this then, like, this is a painting of one of those things, and the prayer is gold leaf.
Hmm.
Uh, I guess I was feeling like those things are so sacred, and I actually have I've painted these little, I mean, this is probably like maybe 2.5 foot circle. It's not small, but I painted a lot of the balls of string after I made them. They just keep showing up.
They're powerful, that's for sure. So here are some photos of the beautiful art on display in the gallery. As I said, Erin's work is shared alongside two other Native American artists. Uh, Tony Tiger was a guest of ours about a month ago, and he has a very fascinating style. And the next month, we're going to visit with Bobby Martin, who also has quite a distinct form of art. And he has a great admiration for the women in his life, too, Erin. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and both of those, I mean, both Tony and Bobby, they're just like incredible, incredible people. So grateful that I get to work and collaborate with them. They're just as good as they come.
Well, I'm very grateful for your expression of art. I'm very grateful for the time that you've shared with us to help us to get more insight into that expression and to share with us a little bit about your own history and your your insights on the faith, your insights on life, with that unique perspective that you bring, both as a creative person as well as through that Indigenous heritage. I want to remind viewers that the show is here. We're open 5 days a week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every week. We're free. The show will be available for you to view until August 13th. It's called Altars of Reconciliation, and you can enjoy Erin's work along with Tony's and Bobby's, uh, as I say, 5 days a week, free here in New Haven, Connecticut, right along the 95 corridor. Erin, God bless you. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I want to say that next presentation will be July 12th with Erin's fellow artist, Bobby Martin, and there is a link to register for that in the handout that I mentioned. So you can download that and sign up now for that session. Everyone that's registered for this will receive a follow-up email with the link to the recording, and please share it with others that you know that you think may benefit from it. Let's see. I think I've covered all of my notes, and except to say, please follow us on social media. Our icons are there at the bottom. You can follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and keep up with all of the details and upcoming events here at the McGivney Center. So until July 12th with Bobby Martin, thanks and God bless.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Erin.